The coming month, October 2023, is likely to be a huge turning point in the story of this year. You can think of it as a bridge connecting the stories of the past 2 years to new narratives waiting to be told in our lives and in the world at large. We're about to see the first eclipse in Libra since 2016. Agreements, partnerships, and a sense of equilibrium are going to be tested and perhaps found wanting. And we'll also be seeing the last lunar eclipse in the sign of Taurus for many years. And we'll see an intensification of transformative Plutonian energy in the sign of Capricorn, when Pluto stations direct very close to its natal position in the United States Sibley chart. This suggests we're likely to see a resurgence of some of the themes of the US Pluto return, including its political divisions and challenges to its global power. Welcome to the first ever World Astrology Report monthly forecast episode, in which we're going to be unraveling the astrology of October 2023 and explaining what it promises for you and for the wider world. But I won't be doing these forecasts alone. I'm delighted to be able to say that I'll be joined by two very special collaborators, and they are the brilliant astrologers Steph Koyfman and S.J. Anderson. So if that sounds like a good time to you, then welcome aboard and let's get into this first forecast episode. Now, the first development we've highlighted this month is the end of the big story of the summer, the Venus retrograde in Leo. Venus, the planet of beauty, desire, and unification, stationed retrograde on July the 23rd at 28 degrees of Leo and stationed direct on September the 4th at 12 Leo.
Venus's function is to create affinities between people and things, like personal style and your taste in music. Venus is also a symbol of what is precious to us. So when Venus is retrograde, the goalposts of our desires are kind of in the air, they're shifting, and it's ultimately an opportunity to reconnect to the living pulse of what's actually important to us.
The astronomical story of Venus retrograde involves Venus disappearing from the night sky as it's hidden by the beams of the sun before eventually being reborn in the morning sky, which happened in late August. So Venus retrogrades can involve empowerment, but perhaps also a sense of taking a journey into the underworld and being reborn.
Think about here, what have you become? With that 4-month period, June, July, August, September, now here in October, with Venus getting reborn, purged, and refreshed, Venus carries this new you into the fall, where Venus will play a leading role in the astrology of the fall because Venus rules both eclipses by domicile.
Venus retrogrades can involve reviewing relationships, rethinking desire, and turning back to our loves of the past. But this one happened in the sign of Leo, associated with self-expression, authenticity, fame, and recognition.
So with Venus in Leo, Leo anatomically corresponds to the heart and the solar plexus. So this particular retrograde, there was a greater focus than usual on reclaiming the heart's authentic desires. So this very solar expression of Venus and the fact that it was squaring Uranus throughout the retrograde created more relationship instability than usual as people focused on getting back to themselves and liberating themselves from situations that compromise their autonomy. This was also famously the summer of breakups. The Cut ran an article called, "This is a great summer to break up." Some of the many high-profile celebrity breakups that Venus retrograde claimed included Britney Spears' relationship, Keke Palmer, Rosalia, Justin Trudeau, Ariana Grande, and the list kept going and going.
What's the nature of a breakup? It's a new self, because the former self was attached to a partner very intimately, and then out from a breakup emerges a new self. And it's a perfect analogy, I think, for all of us experiencing Venus retrograde. We've got new forms of selfhood that now emerge here and bring us into the fall, where maybe we'll have new partnerships and all kinds of new Venusian activities.
Now, when Venus reaches 28 degrees of Leo on October the 7th, it will have finally moved past the position where it's stationed retrograde, or left shadow, as we say in astrology, and whatever Leo story the retrograde was about for you will finally be wrapped up. And soon after Venus leaves shadow, she moves into the analytical, discerning sign of Virgo, the domain of Mercury. This is the sign in which Venus is traditionally held to be in a state of debilitation, known as fall.
A Venus in fall is a Venus that doesn't exactly know how to take pleasure in the process of creating beauty and connection. I feel like maybe the person who first said that beauty is pain might have been a Venus in Virgo native. This is about trying to get the ambience just right, but letting the fly that landed in your soup ruin the whole thing.
I think about the full robustness of our unrestrained pleasures. This might be a pure Venus. Those colliding with carefulness and inhibition and being a little bit anxious maybe about how we want to enjoy things. That's not always a nice pair. It's meticulous. You think about arts and how Venus and Mercury combining can be so important for the artist, because you want to have every prop, everything calculated on a film set, for example. And that's the essence of Virgoan analytics applied to beauty, where beauty finds the rhythm in this kind of poring over of minutia to ensure that the masterpiece can be born. This might be the upside of Venus being in Virgo. Think here about the composer, the poet. Each note, each line of punctuation is crucial to the entirety of a work of art, and we're building the work of art of our lives here.
So I also want to differentiate that there's often a difference between how a placement shows up in someone's natal chart versus how it shows up as a transit. So Venus and Virgo natives are often highly skilled at the art of beauty and connection, but subjectively, they might be hyper-selective about who and what they like, and they might feel as though they have to earn affection through acts of service. So as a transit, Venus and Virgo can look like a gourmet dish served cold, or a date gone horribly wrong. Enjoyment is hard to attain, satisfaction is hard to come by, and maybe people are kind of getting on our nerves. So this feeling is actually going to peak pretty early into Venus's time in Virgo, because as soon as Venus enters Virgo, it runs into an opposition with Saturn on October 10th, and there's also a Virgo moon on the same day to kind of potentiate this opposition. What this means is that the unhappiness announces itself early in the lead up to the eclipses.
There's a transit on the 20th of October. The Capricorn moon will form a grand Earth trine with Venus and Jupiter. Venus in Virgo, Jupiter in Taurus, and this Capricorn moon applies to both very closely. Everything's in a very tight orb. And so it sets up 20 October into the 22nd of October, this lovely Earth trine, meticulous craft, meeting the indulgence of Jupiter in Taurus, every detail laced with the luxury. It's almost like the Venus in Virgo precision pays off here. Some lavish, well-orchestrated praises of desire that a kind of grand Earth trine can be about.
Venus will be the ruler of both eclipses this month, so we'll be coming back to these Venusian themes. But before they happen, Pluto, the Lord of the Underworld, will be making a statement of his own. On October the 11th, Pluto will station direct at 27 degrees and 53 minutes of Capricorn.
So anytime you have a planet like Pluto stationing, you get to see a lot of hidden forms of influence, corruption, and control becoming more visible or more relevant to current events. Pluto in Capricorn is kind of like a mob boss, but it's also a symbol of hierarchical power structures. Pluto has to do with power, like who's really in charge beneath the scenes. In some ways, we've seen the edifices of ancient social institutions, a lot of isms start to crumble, or at least expose themselves more completely since this happened.
On the collective, it's been huge. Pluto came into Capricorn in 2008. Pluto and Capricorn themes: bank failures, 2008 banking crisis, oligarchy, banks getting bailed out, people not being bailed out. All of those Pluto and Capricorn themes where we're seeing the structure of society and maybe the inequities of society. The internet allowed truth to be shown and information to flow in new ways. And then we had all the scandals with Pluto in Capricorn.
And you can see that if we compare the Pluto station to the Sibley chart commonly used for the United States, we can see that it's happening just 20 minutes from Pluto's natal position in that chart. So this looks like a reactivation of the United States Pluto return, which has to do with challenges to American power, including its centrality to the global financial system, the conflict in Ukraine, and the ongoing political divisions that the US is facing.
There were 3 hits throughout the course of 2022. The first being in February, which is when the Ukraine war started and America hit Russia with a bunch of sanctions. Another major plotline of America's Pluto return has been the Trump investigation. So, keep an eye on this Pluto station because it's the second to last direct station in Capricorn. The next one is actually going to be next October, which is right around the time that the elections themselves are taking place.
And so we saw with American politics, with the Trump arrest, as Pluto came back into Capricorn here in 2023, we're revisiting scandals. We had bank failures, just as Pluto has been changing signs here in 2023 earlier in the year. And we might get a return to some of that.
It's also interesting to now be in this space where, Pluto is going back and forth across the sign boundary of Capricorn and Aquarius, because it's wrapping up its time in, a sign where power was distributed from the top down, but it's moving into Aquarius, which actually has to do with power being a little bit more decentralized than we've been used to.
And the direct station of Pluto is happening in what we call a T-square configuration, because Pluto will be square to Mars at 29 Libra and square to a conjunction of Eris and the North Node in Aries. Eris is another dwarf planet, a little smaller than Pluto, but orbiting even further from the Sun, and it's named after the Greek goddess of discord. Eris has been connected by archetypal astrologer Kieran LeGrice with the birth pangs involved in our world becoming globalized. Many astrologers connected the square between Eris and Pluto to the outbreak of COVID-19.
The COVID crisis was timed to a T to the Pluto-Eris 5-path square. The peak years of COVID as it emerges in early 2020 and as lockdowns are at their peak in 2021.
Now in mid-August this year, the WHO announced the emergence of a new COVID variant, and for some reason they decided to name it Eris, which is a very interesting synchronicity given that Eris was about a degree from the North Node at the time.
There's a lot of talk right now as we've gotten here into September and as we get into October of new COVID strains, of new lockdowns, of new mandates. This feels very important as the Pluto-Eris square gets close as it will be without perfecting here in October. And so keep in mind, that this doesn't perfect. Pluto does not get exactly square Eris. This may be more of a brief return here to those 2020-21 themes.
And while Pluto stations direct, Mars, planet of conflict, action and assertiveness, is going to get a lot stronger. On October the 12th, Mars will move into its nocturnal domicile, the water sign of Scorpio. This will be a strong, strategic Mars, which knows how to get what it wants.
Mars returns home for the first time since its long retrograde cycle in Gemini in 2022-2023. Remember that. The last time Mars was in a sign of its domicile or exaltation was 5 July 2022, so over 14 months ago. What is Mars? It's the planet of vigor, the planet of action, the planet of force, the planet of power, of breaking away, of decisiveness, of knowing how to engage in battle. You often see it in ancient texts, Mars being a general or a leader. And as it comes here, striding into its home turf in Scorpio for the first time in a long time, I think we can feel that invigoration, particularly in the Scorpio sector of our charts.
Mars in Scorpio is kind of like the covert sniper version of Mars, whereas maybe Mars in Aries is about ambushing someone out in the open with a huge surge of force, right? Which is more typical of a cardinal sign. Mars in Scorpio really has a sort of tunnel vision when it focuses on its goal and it doesn't let go, right? It's kind of like a dog with a bone. So it's about the longevity of the game plan. It's about winning the war, not the battle, right? It's about really becoming re-energized around our ambitions.
So the house Scorpio falls in on your natal chart will show you an area of life where you might be able to take particularly effective action to achieve something you desire from October the 12th onwards.
There's an innate understanding of core motivation in Scorpio and of desire and aspiration, and that Mars can tap into that core of desire and aspiration and then act from that place. Being aligned with inner desire is the perfect way to enjoy this energy.
And this stronger Mars is going to be in the backdrop when we see something in the sky that hasn't happened since 2016, which seems to particularly implicate the United States of America. On October the 14th or 15th, depending on where you are, we'll see an annular solar eclipse in the 22nd degree of Libra, which is the first eclipse we've seen in that sign since 2016.
This is interesting because we're getting the coincidence of things beginning and things ending with this pair of eclipses that's happening this month. It's the first eclipse in Libra that's happening along the Aries-Libra axis, and it's also the last eclipse in Taurus. And this, that previous series of eclipses, the Taurus-Scorpio ones, were kind of unusually spread out, right? Because we had the first one in the fall of 2021. So we've been going back and forth along this axis now for about 2 years, and now it's finally wrapping up. So this is actually, in a way, kind of a sense of transitioning away from that period of time.
Huge deal to have an eclipse in a new sign, the first eclipse in that sign, because it means a whole new sector of our charts and lives, namely the Libra sector, is targeted with the intensities of eclipse revelation, the changes that are foretold maybe by the natal promise, that are foretold by the choices we've made previously. Those changes get accelerated during eclipses. And so all of that is brought to bear on a new sector.
Libra is the sign of the scales. It's an air sign associated with judgment, balance, fairness, and aesthetics. With the eclipse's ruler, Venus, being in discerning Virgo, we may be weighing up agreements and balances and partnerships and finding them wanting.
The underlying fault line that's triggering these earthquakes is just this underlying sense that maybe this isn't worth it anymore, or maybe my standards have been too low. So another thing about this eclipse is that the ruler Venus is averse to the eclipse, right? It doesn't witness Libra by aspect, and it's separating from an opposition to Saturn. So maybe what this symbolizes is that the disruption or the shakeup is originating from a place of being disempowered, screwed over, maybe in a bind because of something that we previously agreed to that we maybe now regret.
Any kind of promises one has made or that have been made to one might need to be reconsidered here as eclipses arrive to shine light or expose issues, problems, or necessary and needed changes. Agreements might be tested here, and the previous agreements we made could be tested. Previous collaborations could be tested, or new collaborations may emerge.
Eclipses can show their effects weeks in advance, and I think we can already see this one coming into manifestation in various ways. One of them is NATO member Poland's recent decision to stop supplying Ukraine with weapons. Poland argues that the grain deal that's maintained Ukraine's grain exports has flooded its market with cheap grain and is damaging the livelihoods of its own farmers.
Libra is a sign that's always ultimately trying to create balance, but if it's an eclipse, it's actually about a rebalancing that's taking place because you're disrupting the status quo. So this is actually an annular eclipse, right? Because the eclipse itself is taking place within 3 degrees of the node, so it should be pretty potent. It's also conjunct Mercury in Libra, so I'm thinking that there might actually be some sort of legalese or written contract involved in this.
The eclipses can sometimes feel chaotic. They can induce intensities where things maybe aren't settled or clear. And it might be that in the aftermath of these eclipses, as we get into November, Venus coming into Libra, we can settle and see how those reconfigurations have benefited us and why things needed to change.
This is a south node eclipse, meaning it's happening close to the south node of the moon, known in Vedic astrology as Ketu, the tail of the dragon. Now, if the north node, Rahu, the head of the dragon, is about hunger and consumption, and the south node is about excretion and letting things go. The south node moved into the sign of Libra in July this year, but we haven't had much opportunity to see what it's doing in the Libra parts of our natal charts. But we may get a sense of that around October the 4th when Mars conjoins the node.
This might shake up those relationships. There may be a beginning shock to these relational systems that then cascades into that solar eclipse on the 14th of October and into the then story of our eclipses and our eclipse season.
I would keep an eye on the south node in Libra as a general plot line throughout October, and it's not just this eclipse, because there's going to be a series of planets that all conjoin the south node one by one throughout the month. Mars, the Sun, and then Mercury. So I'm calling this the K2 car wash, right? Because when planets conjoin the south node, they temporarily strip themselves of their power and some of the residue that needs to be burned off, but then they go through this intense purification process. When I think about what the South Node in Libra represents, it makes me think of the toxic shadow side of Libra, sometimes the inauthentic behavior that arises out of a need to keep the peace. And so the South Node is really pointing to where these inauthenticities are forcing us to leak energy. All of these conjunctions are happening at 24 degrees of Libra, and right after the planet conjoins the South Node, it immediately runs into a square with Pluto. So this feels like a rough draft of some sort of searing expose, but you're removing the euphemism before you hit publish, right? Mercury and the Sun both hit the South Node, and then they form a conjunction. So Mercury, that's a Mercury Cazimi square Pluto on October 20th. So I wonder if there might be some sort of shocking expose in the news around that time. Keep an eye for what happens around that time.
Our South Node, Ketu, a planetary point of asceticism. It's the tail of the snake. So we think about the things that we excrete or let out of the backside. This might be a good time to turn away from others and let the Ketu eclipse take you inward so that when eclipse season is over later in the fall, you're back having had an ascetic moment here to reconsider some of the commitments you have. You can be more empowered.
Here's a map from timeanddate.com showing where the eclipse will be visible, and you can see that it's highlighting the Americas, including the United States and some of the countries of origin of many of the immigrants who are entering the country right now. And the theme of law and justice, particularly as it pertains to solar figures, which are leaders, celebrities, and people in positions of centrality, will be highlighted.
This is also the first of a pair of 2 eclipses that are going to be directly visible over America over the next 6 months or so. So there's going to be a corresponding eclipse in Aries right around 19 degrees, so it's almost exactly opposite this one in April of next year. So this one in October, it's going to be visible over the western half of the US, and the April eclipse will be visible over the eastern half. So all of this is happening during the last hits of America's Pluto return and election season. If you look at where it's falling in the Sibley chart of the United States, the Libra eclipse falls in the 11th house of legislative bodies, in this case Congress. And the ruler is sitting in the 10th house, which often represents the head of state. So this might be some sort of congressional ruling involving a current or former leader.
Just pick up the paper and you can see these stories about governance and leadership in the United States. Peaking here now as we get into this Libra solar eclipse right here in October. Leaders of both political parties, so in America it's a 2-party system, Democrat, Republican. The leaders of both of those parties, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, both of them are under intense legal scrutiny right now. So the Speaker of the House, McCarthy, opened an impeachment inquiry right in mid-September, an inquiry on Joe Biden, which sets up a vote to impeach him in the House, maybe sometime later in 2023. There's commentators talking about the Senate trial that House impeachment vote would trigger, running along with those Trump trials in 2024. And so just as this new eclipse cycle hits, we might have trials of both party leaders all throughout 2024 with these Libra eclipses. I think this is interesting because it doesn't matter what side you take in America right now. Either way, the story holds. The eclipses win. Their symbolism is asserting no matter your political proclivities.
Something we can expect to see with this eclipse is an increase in tensions between state governments of the United States and the federal government. And if we look again at the paths of the October Libra eclipse and the Aries eclipse in April next year, there's only one state in which both will be fully visible.
Texas is right in the crosshairs and maybe the center of what these political changes may be about. I think there's something that relates to the balance of federalism in America that could be under pressure. The other thing is that economic issues are often timed to eclipses. And in this case, there's major power struggles related to budget. And there's a power struggle in Congress. They appear to be on track to trigger a government shutdown starting on October 1st, 2023.
And with a fallen Venus here, I'd also wonder about the possibility of legal issues coming up of particular concern to women. We've already seen some of that with the accusations against Russell Brand and other prominent comedians in recent weeks. And with Pluto back in Capricorn, this also seems to be a return to themes that emerged with the Me Too movement many years ago. But now Capricorn's ruler Saturn is in Pisces, and the target of the accusations is a man now best known for working within the Piscean realms of spirituality and quote-unquote conspiracy. But eclipses come in pairs, and the second of these 2 eclipses looks like it might round the month off with a bang. On October the 28th, we will see a partial lunar eclipse in the 6th degree of Taurus, a sign in which we've been seeing eclipses since November 2021.
And this is not only significant because it's the last of a series that's now wrapping up, but also 5 degrees of Taurus has been a pretty hot degree in 2023. So Mercury stationed direct there back in May, and Jupiter is going to station direct at 5 degrees of Taurus on New Year's Eve. So not only does this represent some sort of continuity in the Taurus-Scorpio series, but also it's connected to that timeline that's described by, whatever that degree has been about for you or for the world at large.
The last eclipse in the Taurus-Scorpio axis this eclipse cycle. Huge unfoldment here in October. We're putting to bed all of the intensities that started in November 2021 with the first lunar eclipse in Taurus.
The Sabian symbols are a set of 360 images, one for every degree of the zodiac, They were channeled in 1923 by a psychic named Elsie Wheeler through the prompting of the famous astrologer Mark Edmund Jones. And they can sometimes be insightful in understanding astrological configurations. And the image associated with the 6th degree of Taurus, where the eclipse is happening, is entitled "A Bridge Being Built Across a Gorge."
Sabian symbol is very apropos because as this cycle winds down, so part of this eclipse season includes the first solar eclipse in Libra. The other part of this eclipse season is the last eclipse in Taurus. So this whole eclipse season is like a bridge. We're traversing out of Taurus, Scorpio, and in now fully to Libra, Aries. It's the more passive and more internalized way of experiencing pleasure and relationship. And now we shift into a more active power of cardinal initiation, of going into the outer world. I think this eclipse season can tell us about how we take the lessons of 2022, the lessons of Taurus Scorpio eclipses, and now we're deploying those lessons in a more active and a powerful and assertive way here.
So this eclipse is ruled by Venus and Virgo just like the last one, but the Taurus eclipse actually witnesses Venus by trine. So there might actually be a greater sense of agency involved in whatever this eclipse is doing. We might be a little bit less victimized by what's happening. We might actually feel empowered to be the source of the changes that are taking place in our lives.
But the eclipse also implicates a tight opposition between a Mars-Mercury conjunction in Scorpio and Jupiter in Taurus.
So there's a lot of oppositional tension. A North Node eclipse conjunct Jupiter, it's going to involve some sort of theme of gain and acquisition. But the Mars opposition kind of introduces this element of competition or urgency, almost like if I don't apply for this job or if I don't go grab the last dessert at the dessert table, someone else will get it before I do. This is the last Taurus eclipse. It's the last chance to grab a slice of that particular pie. It's a chance to kind of get even or get what's ours. To reclaim something that we sacrificed to keep the peace when it didn't even work.
A huge part of this lunar eclipse in Taurus, the chart of it, is Mars in Scorpio, exactly opposite Jupiter in Taurus. And so Mars as a leader and as an actor, seeing Jupiter opposing it and the expansions, this could be something like the appetites or the ambition. This may be a perfect time to reconfigure what we think we want, what we think is pleasurable, what we think is desirous, and then let those new goals and those new models drive that Mars and Scorpio powerful action that will be with us the rest of October and the rest of the month.
Here's the astro map for this eclipse, and you can see that it will be culminating over East Africa, parts of the Middle East, the Caucasus, and Russia. On a mundane level, we have to consider that this eclipse is happening in Taurus, a sign associated with wealth and property. Given that the eclipse is implicating Russia and probably by extension the war in Ukraine, I do wonder about the possibility of ambitious or large-scale attacks on connective infrastructure being signaled here. But we shall see. So thanks so much for joining us this time. All three of us are consulting astrologers and are available for private consultations right now. You can book us through our websites listed in the details below.
You can find me, you can find my work, sjanderson144.com. Everything's there. You can look for readings with me. I do astrology readings, natal readings. You can check out my YouTube channel at sjanderson144 right here on YouTube. Great to be with you. Have an awesome month of October. Peace.
And Steph is also taking on a limited number of retainer clients. Again, see the video description. And I'm currently working on a series of videos that aims to explore the true nature of the strange times we're living through and what's coming in 2026. The first episode is already out, and in it, we take our first steps on this journey and learn about the planetary cycle that speaks to the evolution of human consciousness, faith, and belief over time. Thanks, and see you next time.